Welcome to the Kimono software. The Kimono software is a monitoring solution for Outback Power solar systems. It can interact with the Mate 3S device and display lots of very interesting information on the screen. It runs on Windows PCs, Windows 10, the one it was developed on, and it is free and open source for anybody to use. Just be aware that there is no warranty. Any use you make of this or any decisions you make on the data it displays is entirely your responsibility. At no time does the author of this software, i.e. me, claim that the software is free of bugs or misinformation. So, without further ado, let's have a look at the Kimono software. What's going on here? This doesn't look like a typical monitoring solution, which usually has a nice graphical display showing the power flow around the system and ins and outs and all that sort of thing. Indeed, it isn't. It's more industrial than that. I built it for my uses, and so it displays the sort of thing I want to see. What you see on the screen here is 15 little cells called monitor blocks. And each monitor block updates itself with the status of your Outback system as determined by the Mate 3S in real time. Let me turn on a heater here and you can see the system battery voltage in the upper right hand corner drop. Apparently I got lots of solar power. It's not dropping as much as I would have thought. There it's back now. Okay, let's talk about what these monitor blocks mean. Each monitor block represents a specific item of the system state as determined by the Mate 3S. So up in this corner here we see the Mate 3S system battery voltage value. As you can see, it's updating in real time. It's a number monitor block. It displays a number, as is this one, as is this one. The ones down here are called graph monitor blocks, and they can display a graphical display of the history of a system over time. So yes, I know what you're thinking here. Obviously, the Kimono software is writing stuff and recording it and that sort of thing. And we'll get to that, but let's just say it does it. So you can display 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 50 days, whatever you want. You can have it in there. And then there's other types of monitor blocks called text ones that basically display text-based information. The information comes out of the Mate 3S as a string of text, and so you can display it on the screen. There's much more information coming out of the Mate 3S on your charge controllers, on your FNDC, on your inverters and all that can be displayed in 15 little cells. But in general, you can cherry pick the ones that really matter to you and display them yourself. Before we proceed further, one point to keep in mind is the fact that these monitor blocks are all fully configurable. You can set each little individual cell to display whichever information you wish, and to a large extent you can customize its appearance. So you can change the title, you can change the suffix or the prefix, that sort of thing. As we shall see, there's a good deal more to it than that, but for now, just keep in mind that you can set this display to display whatever information you wish in whichever format you wish. Okay, now we're going to take a brief detour and stop talking about the Kimono software for a bit, and we'll start talking about how the Kimono software actually gets its information. As you will see, this will become important to your understanding of the Kimono software and how it works. Fundamentally, there are two ways of getting the data out of an Outback solar power system. You see, the devices all have the capability of sending and receiving configuration and state information via a protocol called Modbus. But they don't really talk to each other. The inverter doesn't talk to the charge controllers and that sort of thing. They talk to a central device which sits in the center and correlates all this thing. In most cases, this is the Mate 3S. In some cases, it's another device called the aux port, AUX port. But that's a more industrial thing and it doesn't have a user interface. So the Mate 3S sits in the middle, talks to all the devices, and basically you can use the user interface on the Mate 3S to go and change the settings and see the state of things. And lots of very useful and interesting information there. However, the Mate 3S also has the capability of presenting the Modbus information that's being communicated around the system by all the devices over TCP/IP to a device on the internet or on your local area network. It's important to remember that Modbus, even though they use the same connectors, are not Ethernet ports. You cannot plug Ethernet into the hub. You will burn out your device. So basically, the Mate 3S, besides doing all the other things it does, makes it possible for devices to get the Modbus system information via TCP/IP. And it also enables them to update the state of the system as if they were anything else on it. So that's all very powerful and everything, but there's also another mechanism that the Mate 3S provides, and that is a HTTP port. It acts as an HTTP server, and it serves some of the information that's available via Modbus over the protocol known as HTTP, so web browser basically. And so any web browser can connect to the Mate 3S over your local area network and see the system state. However, it's not updatable, so it's read-only. The web browser mechanism is read-only. So the trade-off here is the Modbus is much more powerful, and it can also update. You get access to much more information, but it's complicated to implement. The web interface, the HTTP interface, is pretty simple to use, and it's a little bit more lightweight in the sense that you don't get all of the details, and you certainly can't update, but the web server essentially makes a device on the internet, i.e. a PC on your local area network, able to access the information in the Mate 3S. It's this protocol, HTTP, that Kimono is using. The other monitoring solutions that you see about are much more sophisticated. They use the Modbus mechanism, talking about Optics RE and Wattplot and such. And so they can update the system, they can set the system state, and they get a lot more information. But Kimono is kind of lightweight, and it gives you the information that you get, but there's no update. So let's have a quick look at the information you do get from the HTTP protocol. I will start up the web browser now. As you can see, I've typed in the IP address of my Mate 3S, which is on my local area network, and I see a nice page displaying that I'm getting 590 watts and my battery state of charge and the maximum today and stuff like that. If we go over here, we can see the inverter, we can see the charge controllers, and we can see the battery. And so this is an important point. If you cannot type an IP address into your browser and get this sort of page displayed to you, then Kimono is not going to work, because it uses exactly the same information that this page does and exactly the same connection mechanism. So this is more visual, and it's a nice summary of the screen, but the information is really kind of hard to get access to programmatically. Fortunately, Outback has provided a mechanism to give you access to the raw data that this page is using. All you do is you put in the specific string, and it gives you a very complicated list of parameters regarding everything it chooses to send. So this is all very complicated, and this is what Kimono consumes. Basically, it's just going there and getting that. But if you have a look at it in a bit more formatted mechanism, the Firefox browser can format it for you. You can see that there's all sorts of information here that, when it's organized, is a little bit more understandable. So the first thing we see is this device here, and it's the Mate 3S, and it has a system battery voltage of 27. Then we're going in. These are basically the ports on the hub. The first one is the inverter, and it has all sorts of fields in here regarding interesting inverter information. Down here, this one's for the first charge controller, and we have all sorts of charge controller information. So the battery voltage, the in voltage, the out current, that sort of thing. Now, it's not terribly self-explanatory, but it's not all that obscure either. You can see what's going on here. And here's the FNDC with all its information, the various shunts and input amps and the output amps and kilowatt hours and that sort of thing. Note that some of this information is a number and some of this information is text. You know, you have to know this, you have to pay attention to this. So what's going to happen is Kimono is going to access your Mate 3S via this port. It's going to get something in that looks like that. It's going to consume it. It's going to stuff it into various storage places so it knows how to access it. And it's going to run down through this. And so it's going to call this one the Mate 3S. And it's just going to take them in order. So the first inverter port it sees, it knows it's an invert because it says FXR. It's going to call INV1. And so the next charge controller port is going to call it CC1. If there's more than one, it's going to call it CC2, CC3, strictly in order. And of course, there's usually only one FNDC, so it's just the FNDC port, not FNDC1. So that's how it works. So basically, inside of Kimono, you're going to refer to something as FNDC hashtag SOC without the colon. Case matters here. Case really matters. It does not baby you in that respect. If it says MINSOC and it's got an underscore and lowercase letters, that's exactly what you put when you want to refer to it in a monitor block. So to get this one on the screen, you basically refer to it as FN to C hashtag SOC. It all correlates back to this stuff, and you can easily figure out what it means by looking at both screens at the same time. Now that we have a bit more understanding of where Kimono gets its data, let's have another look at the Kimono screen. And so what we see here is, I've left the title here as FNDC MINSOC. So it's displaying the minimum state of charge, and it's put 83%. And it's scraping it right out of that stuff, just like it got it off the web page itself, right out of that text. On the right-hand side here, you will see that there are preset monitor blocks. So basically pre-configured monitor blocks. I'll go through those in a minute, but there's basically one for everything. So there's already one pre-configured for the state of charge. Let's have a look at what you're going to see when you first start up Kimono. Let's make no mistake, you're going to need to configure it. Well, it looks considerably different than the display you saw previously. There are no monitor blocks beside this one up in the top left-hand corner. The reason is Kimono is ultimately configurable. It doesn't baby you. You are expected to configure it how you want, where you want, and see the information you want. That whole process is up to you. It does not give you much out of the box besides the main system battery voltage. So what you do is you do configure it. The first things you might want to try are using some of the presets to see some of the preset information. Now the presets are already configured monitor blocks, and the first letter of the preset gives you an indication what it is. So if it's a G, it's a graph one. If it's an N, it's a number one. And if it's a T, it's a text one. So there are no number ones down here in the text one. So you can't have a AC input field be a number, so there's not a number one for that. So let's have a look at our old friend, the state of charge, the FNDC. All we do is drag and drop it, and it will update in real time. If we decide that we wanted it somewhere else, we move it there. If we wanted to have another one, let's have a look at a text one, for example. Let's have a look at the first charge controller aux1 block. Well, we can put it in there, and we can see our auxiliary output is disabled. You can move these monitor blocks around how you wish. They can move about. And you can also write them over the top of the other ones, like that. So if you drag one onto the top of the other one, it just switches them. If you take this one and you decide you don't want it there anymore, just drop it in the trash can. If you decide you want to configure the thing, say you wanted to have, instead of saying 93 there, you want to see 93 volts, click on this little icon in the upper right corner, you roll down and you put in the suffix here of V. And then you click on that again, and next time it updates, it will show you a little V there. And so you want a different title, you could just have a different title. It's up to you what you put there. Now the title says state of charge. These, by the way, are called properties. And so you might be thinking, how am I going to change all these little properties? I can barely see them. They're really small. If you go and hold down the control key and you click on the icon, you will see, oops, it's popped out off the screen here. You will see a larger version of the properties. So if you click on that, it tells you what each thing does. This is the suffix, that sort of thing. And so you can make your changes however you want, and you can then save it, and it goes and makes the changes for you. So remember that whole control key thing. It does a lot of things. If anytime you think, oh, something should behave differently than it does, try holding down the control key, and you'll find that maybe it does. So the user-defined monitor blocks are for if you want to save your settings. So you can go here and put it there, and it moves it there. And then you can move it back out of there. So it allows you to basically have a little scratch pad of stuff. And if you save the setup, it will save your user-defined sets. So you can keep a selection of them that you don't use very often, but you notice, hang on, it moves it off the screen. I didn't want that. I just wanted to record it there. Well, hold down the control key, put it there. And then you'll see that it keeps it there and does that sort of thing. Similarly, if you drag one onto another, say, for example, I put the first charge controller out amp hours, and I drag it on top of that one, and it's erased it. No, it hasn't. It's just gone into the user-defined thing. It keeps it there. And if you didn't want it there, you could just drop it out. If you hold down the control key, of course, it will annihilate it. So there you go. Basically, in summary, you can configure the screen how you want, and you can change the properties so that it says what you want. We've seen two types of monitor blocks so far, the number ones and the text ones. Actually, I've taken the text one off the screen. Let's put one back there just so we can say we have one. And this is coming straight out of that text that the Mate 3S sends via its web server. So we can even see that text. If we go here on the Setup tab and look at the JSON data, we can see here it's nicely formatted for us. It's got the same thing I showed you before, so I won't labor the point. But you can actually see that. Or you can see the raw JSON. So if you ever have to email me and say it's not working or something like that, make sure you just copy and paste that into an email. That's the one I need to see. Okay, returning from our little digression, let's have a look at a different type of monitor block, the graphics one. Now that's kind of cool. So let's have a look at a graphical display of the state of charge from the FNDC. So where is it? Down here, FNDC state of charge. Just like any other monitor block, we just drop it on the screen wherever we please. And we see that it gives us a little tiny graphical display. This shows the historical state of charge over the past 2 days. Every day is nicely divided by a set of vertical bars there. And so you can see the scale here, and it auto scales. So basically, you don't have 0 at the bottom. It's gone between, over these last 2 days, it's gone between about 85 and 100. So that's what it displays. And so this updates in real time as well. So you do get the display updating, scooching off to the left there. And so, of course, it has properties too. I'll hold down the control key. You can see here you have your data source. I haven't talked too much about that yet, so we'll just move on from that. But the days display, so if we change the days to display equals 3, and we have our title text and that sort of thing. I'm not going to bother changing all that, but we save that. We can see that we now get 3 days. This kind of implies one thing. Somehow it knows what those values were for the last 3 days. Well, that's true. It records the data to a database on the disk. So the first time you start it, you're not going to see much because you don't have any recorded data. But after you let it run for a couple of days, you'll be able to see more information. So if the data's not there, it's not there. It can't make it up. It can't go back and interrogate the Mate 3S and get historical data out of there. That data's just not there. At least not via the HDB method, it's not. So if we go again and have a look at that, we can see some other things here as well. I'll just give a quick explanation. So we can see that the data endpoint is fixed end of day. So that's why there's a gap here between here and the end of day. If we want it to roll, we just change it. And then next time it updates, it gets enough to fill the thing and roll off the end. So it just gives you a bit more, a bit bigger. Let's talk about the monitor block and its data. So let's go back to our old friend, system battery. The thing that's controlling it is the data source here is the Mate 3S #sysbatv. We can just update this. So we could change it to FNDC state of charge and it will cheerfully do that. So let's just go ahead and do that. FNDC #SOC. Remember, case matters. And there it is. So we're seeing it now that, the title's wrong now. We have to change that to SOC. So and of course the prefix is wrong, so we'll change that to a %. So we can see here that that's the state of charge. So these things, although it came out of a preset and everything else like that, these things aren't written in stone. You can change them to however you want. And if you just want to start at the very beginning and put one in, you can just drag and drop a generic number block here. And you can go and say, I want to have charge controller 1 out amp hours. And again, it's just device is telling you what it wants. So CC1, remember, they go down in order as it processes a thing. Charge controller 1, charge controller 2, charge controller 3, INV1, INV2, INV3, FNDC, Mate 3S. It does that. So we're looking at charge controller 1. I forget what I said I was going to look at. Out kilowatt hours. OUT KWH. And we go here, and there it goes. So we could say, put our little prefix on there, suffix on there, whatever we want. No need to do that. So you can configure them how you want, and you can save them. Just hit the Save Setup button, and next time you start, it will start up with that state on the screen. Let's talk for a little bit about how the screen update and the database update mechanism works. Basically, they're two separate things. The screen can update much more rapidly than the database. So you could update your screen every second, every 2 seconds, every 3 seconds, but you really don't want to be writing your data out to the database every 2 seconds. You're going to flood the database. It doesn't really change. So unless you're actually chasing some sort of weird transient data phenomenon, once a minute, once every 2 minutes, once every 3 minutes is perfectly satisfactory. Otherwise, you just get a huge database. All of this sort of thing is controlled by the information on the setup panel. Let's just talk about the setup panel for a bit. Here I'm saying I'm writing to the screen every 1 second. That means it's going to the Mate 3S and getting the new information every second and updating the screen with it. However, every 60 seconds, it is updating the database, probably more than it ever needs. This here is the address of the Mate 3S. You will be prompted when you first start the Kimono software to put in the address of the Mate 3S, but if you ever need to change it, just put it in here, save the setup, and I suggest you close it and start it again because the existing connection will be sitting there trying to connect and it'll be timing out and that sort of thing. If you don't want to write to the database, just click that. If for some reason you don't want to update the screen, just update that. The save settings go in this directory here. At the moment, at the time this video is made, there's no way to change that. I'll probably add a change functionality, but this is just going into my documents under the Kimono subdirectory. It has a log file, so if the things go wrong, it's going to put out the information to the log file. And this is where the database file is as well, also in the Kimono subdirectory there. And you can just click on this button and open up the folder there. And that's just a Windows Explorer. That's all it does is open that up. So that's basically the setup. So there's only 2 panels. It's very simple. You got the setup panel and you got the monitor blocks panel. At the bottom of this screen here is a little thing that tells you the last time the screen got updated and the last time the database got updated. And so if this isn't ticking over, then you know something's wrong. But you're going to get an error message on the screen. You may have noticed that over on the setup panel, there was one button we didn't talk about. Let's have a look at that one now. There we are, Open Plot Report. This is interesting because it allows you to see historical data from the database. So let's just have a look at that now. We open up the plot report. We can see here that we have plot 1. We can put in, say, FNDC, and we can see the state of charge here, and we can plot it, and it appears on the screen. It's not dissimilar to a graphical monitor block, but it's much bigger. And also, you can do lots of interesting things. You can go and scroll in and scroll out, drill down. You can pan left and right. You can right-click and copy the image, save the image as, zoom to fit data, that sort of thing. So let's put the data back, FNDC, state of charge, and plot it. And then we can go down here and see what our battery voltage did during that time. And so we can see here it's auto-scaling and our state of charge dropped down there, but our battery voltage hasn't changed that much. We can change the interval here to every 30 minutes, every 10 minutes, that sort of thing. And we can change our dates. We can look back, to see various things. So it's all a plotting functionality. You get 3 of them. So you can put 3 things against one another, and you can have a look. So let's talk about what this data interval means. So there's only so many pixels across here. And so if you're plotting a year's worth of data on here, and you take it every 5 minutes, that is an absolute ton of data there that this graph has got to figure out and display. You don't really need it. If you're doing a year's worth of data, take it every day. If you're doing a day's worth of data, then take it every 5 minutes. Otherwise, it just slows things down. So that's what the data interval means. I mean, it'll still plot a year's worth of data if you take 5-minute intervals. It's just got to do a lot more work. On a fast PC, it probably doesn't matter. So obviously, the start date, end date, pretty self-explanatory. And so you just pick and choose what you want. The plotting feature is pretty useful. You drill down and see all sorts of interesting things. So if we go back to the monitor blocks panel, note that the graphical monitor block also contains a plot, but it can't be scrolled or panned. It's just too much functionality for such a small thing. However, I won't go into it right now, but you can just double click on it and it'll take you right into the plot display preset with all of the configuration. That also goes for number blocks. For example, if you take a state of charge number block and you double click on it, it will take you right in to the plot form. So far, all we've done with the monitor blocks is to display the information that we pulled directly out of the data that the Mate 3S sends us via its web server. However, you may have also noticed that these monitor blocks, the little grid, looks kind of like a very large sort of spreadsheet. And in fact, they do have a certain amount of spreadsheety type capability. Let's see what we can do with them. Let's put something interesting in there, say like the charge controller 1 out kilowatt hours, and we'll drop it right in there. So we got 1.7 kilowatt hours, and of course that's coming straight out of the Mate 3S data. So I will just go and control, right click here. The data source is always the device plus the field. However, if we preface this with an equal sign, we can do some sort of spreadsheet type stuff. So say for example, we get 40 cents per kilowatt hour. We can put a formula here. Now you can't do as complicated a formula as you might do in your spreadsheet, but you can do the simpler stuff. Add, subtract, multiply, divide, that sort of thing. And you can use fields from multiple fields from the Mate3S data. Just put them in where you would, and also constants. And so we'll put a little dollar sign in here. And so we'll save that. And there we are. We can see now that we've calculated a value from that. So we're not displaying, even though our title says we're displaying the kilowatt hours, we'll just put in CC1 out value. So we can use spreadsheet functionality in our data source. So far we've seen that we can configure a number monitor block to use either the exact value coming out of the Mate3S's data, or we can put it into a formula and use simple sort of manipulations upon it, such as multiplying it by a constant or adding, subtracting from another value from the Mate3S, that sort of thing. But what if we wanted to use this value in another monitor block? So it's a complex calculation here. We want to use it over here. How could we do that? Well, if it was a spreadsheet, we'd probably refer to this cell as what? B4, A, B, 1, 2, 3, 4. So B4. Well, because the monitor blocks can move around real easy, I don't want to have to go through the trouble of updating your formulas for you as you move the monitor blocks in and out and changing them and stuff like that. It's just getting a little bit too complex. So what you can do is you can give it a reference. So you call it anything you want, my ref 1. And there it is. And that doesn't change this. It's just the value other monitor blocks can refer to it by. So we'll take the number monitor block, drop it in here. And so in the data source here, we can just say equals $ my ref 1. So you put an equal sign in to tell it it's a complex formula. You put a $ sign in to tell Kimono that it's actually referring to another cell by the word, and then you basically have to do that. And we can also go and put this, I'll just put this in the title just for reference purposes. So this can also be a complex sort of calculation. So we can take my ref 2 times 1, 2, 3, a contrived example, okay? But you get the point. You can configure it how you want. And so there it is. That's 1, 2, 3 times that. So you can actually save your own computed data back to the database as well. What you do is you give it a special reference. In this case, because it's a number, user data number 01. And you have user data number 01. These are reserved words. If you put in this one, 01 to 14, so 14, so 01, 02, 03, all the way up to 14, it will actually write it out to the database when it writes out all this other stuff. And so then you can do that, and it doesn't change anything you see on the screen, but next time the database writes, it will go into the table in the database. And then you can go over here on the plot report and things like this, and you can say, okay, I want to see user data, and I want to see UDN. This is the one I did earlier. I think there's some in UDN 03, and then you can see there's some here, and we'll give it a couple days past, so 24. So yeah, this is some user data I was plotting. I think it's probably just the system voltage, something like that. But anyways, you get the idea. The point is you can record your own data back to the database as if it had come in from the main. This data can be the result of other calculations you did directly on the Mate3S data or other calculations some other cell did on the Mate3S data. So it's kind of sophisticated like that. Well, that's the Kimono software. Basically, it provides a monitoring solution for Outback systems, and it is quite configurable, as you've seen. It's free, it's open source, maybe you can find a use for it. Thank you.